Hello, everyone. Welcome to my micro lecture series focused on the evolution of consciousness. Today's video will focus on the evolution of human consciousness in particular. We'll be beginning from the Upper Paleolithic through the Neolithic into the emergence of civilization, looking at how consciousness developed through coherence, precision, differentiation, and symbolic thought. This is a brief overview, introductory overview into this micro lecture series. Each video, my hopes is each video will be about in between 20 and 30 minutes. And I'm hoping to do them bi-weekly or at least once a month. It just depends on my schedule. I'm currently going through graduate school while working with children and everything else in between. And I'm also in the process of trying to further develop my model of the evolution of consciousness that this video micro lecture series will be related to. So as these videos go, we'll backtrack further to truly understand how consciousness may have emerged, beginning from the Big Bang through the formation of the Earth, DNA, sensory modalities, hemispheric differentiation, and symbolic thought. But for now, we'll go over this more introductory overview process that will kind of get us kickstarted, hopefully, in the correct direction. I kind of chose the starting point for the introductory overview pertaining to how human consciousness became more precise and coherent. Beginning from the time of the Paleolithic through the Neolithic and into civilization, the emergence of writing and systematic governance and things of that nature. It kind of gives an eye-opening to how consciousness may have actually formed even in its most primitive forms, in the proto-type consciousness, stemming all the way towards the beginning of the universe at the Big Bang and related to subatomic particles, quantum physics, things of that nature, where I believe it's the most fundamental level of consciousness itself that has amalgamated over the course of time in a hierarchical fashion to provide consciousness, not just for humans, but animals and plants and things of that nature, which are lower, more prototypical type features of consciousness. And so not really looking at it in a metaphysical sense, so to speak, although perhaps there is something related to that through religion, through Christianity on videos I've done before. But that will be for a later time as we go through this process of how it may relate to all of that, perhaps even through a simulated reality that we may inhabit. Who knows? More speculation than anything else, but we're going to try to keep this as empirical as possible. We're also going to be applying a depth psychological analysis to this lecture series to investigate how consciousness and perhaps a collective unconscious of that nature had developed, and ultimately we can go on towards the end of this lecture series to how it could apply to the individual life and society as a whole, and where we're currently progressing towards, what the trajectory of our evolutionary choices are through selection pressures that we have that are found in modernity and the culture that we have developed, and how perhaps making a few adaptive changes may actually help us progress in a more conducive pathway to the overall human flourishing. So, but for now, we'll just look at this overview. So today's video, evolution of consciousness, Venus, Göbekli Tepe, and the process of differentiation, exploring the evolution of human consciousness through coherence, precision, and symbolic thought. Now, this was supposed to have dates, so bear with me here. For some reason, it did not transfer over. I do not know why. As tech savvy as I may try to be. So The Upper Paleolithic constitutes the time frame of about 40,000 BC to 10,000 BC. And then you enter into what's called the Neolithic, especially in the Middle East, where the site of Göbekli Tepe is housed there in ancient somewhat prehistoric Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey, and the Fertile Crescent, now where Samaria, ancient Samaria was at, and you have the Levant, where modern day Israel and Palestine and Jordan, things of that nature are located. So prehistoric artwork fully emerges in Europe and the Middle East, beginning at 40,000 BC, which again marks the beginning of the Upper Paleolithic, and it goes until about 10,000 BC. And at this time, which we'll go in, these are just kind of a brief timeline overview of, and we'll go into a little bit more detail as we go through this. But all of a sudden, artwork began to flourish in abundance and in precision as well during that particular time. Now, there was some artwork prior to that, more primitive prototype artwork, etchings and some crosses and things of that nature, X's, for perhaps signifying the relationship with dates or counting time, things of that nature. They're not entirely sure, but in the earliest type artwork that's deliberately symbolic in that manner has actually been found here just recently in I believe it was Indonesia, dating to 68,000 years. So it's not as though all of a sudden artwork manifested. They believed that for a long time, but now we're beginning to find evidence for more ancient primitive forms of artwork that spread throughout the world, and just all of a sudden began to increase substantially during this particular time in the amount and diversity of artwork, as well as in the precision of artwork. So we'll see that. Then beginning around 11,000, trying to remember the exact dates. Let me see here. We got 11,000, around 10,900 BC. We have the Younger Dryas period, which lasted about 1,000 years, 1,300 year period. It was marked by increased ice sheets. The world cooled off. And prior to that time, we were coming out of the last ice age. And so the climate began to shift to warmer weather, and then all of a sudden, wetter weather. And then all of a sudden, there was a break in that climate beginning around 10,900 BC that shifted in a manner that regressed that warmer transition back into freezing temperatures, expanded ice sheets, at least in part. And then it came to an abrupt end, and then you had mass flooding, rising sea levels by about 400 feet. 400 feet or 400 meters, I can't remember exactly. I think it was 400 feet throughout the world, just at the end of that. And then at the end of that, you have a sudden emergence of agriculture. And a little bit later, around 7,000 BC, or even a little bit prior to that, the introduction of herding animals, domestication of animals. We began to learn how to control the environment more so, rather than hunting and gathering. So we shifted from hunting and gatherers to agriculturalists, and we were able to herd animals, domesticate animals, and we became more sedentary in our lifestyle. When we're hunting and gatherers, we're more mobile, moving about the land, traveling a lot more, following herds of animals. Wherever the food resources were going, that's where we went. Now we were able to plant ourselves in one location and really control how much food that we have. And that's when an abundance of food began to manifest, which shifted humanity on a collective level in a dramatic way. And at that very same time, you also have the emergence of the first megalithic structure, which is Göbekli Tepe. And then you have from there, you have Navale Kore, you have several different sites around there that mimic that same type of architecture. And then around 9000 BC, shifting from the pre-pottery Neolithic A into the pre-pottery Neolithic B, you have new architectural design featuring 90-degree angles, so rectangular features rather than circular. So we'll go into that more. That's a brief overview and said a little more than what I probably should have. So here's regarding depth psychology. You have Carl Jung, Eric Neumann. Eric Neumann's author of The Origins and History of Consciousness. Very intriguing book. Highly recommend it. Carl Jung, multiple different books on the psyche, coming from a psychoanalytic focus from his interactions with Sigmund Freud. Him and Sigmund Freud were fairly good friends prior to having a falling away, as he deferred on how things manifest themselves from the unconscious and things of that nature. And they ended up developing, or Jung rather, differentiated himself, developing his own perception of how the psyche actually works, compared to Freud, which Freud was not very happy about. And so they had a falling away. And but he focused on how you have the self, which is the overarching conscious self, and then you have the ego, which is the identification, the more precise parts of the self, what we identify with. And then we also have the unconscious of the self, and we have the collective unconscious. And the unconscious is where many things that we would rather not investigate are hidden within. And things that dictate our behavior oftentimes manifest from the unconscious rather than actual conscious actions, especially more habitual things that we do partake in are features more or less from the unconscious. And he believed that we should delve into that unconscious through a process called individuation to better unify the psyche and bring about greater coherence as we delve into the unconscious. And oftentimes that was done through the acquisition of novel information. And the more that we acquired new information, the more we had to reconfigure our schemas, and it would cause a transformative shift in our psyche, and it would unify certain things. Because oftentimes when we're continuing with new information, we're continuing with unconscious features of ourselves, and those unconscious, and not just ourselves, but even of the collective history that has been accumulated over the course of time. And as we work those unconscious stigmas out, then we can kind of integrate them into the ego and into the self to make ourselves more whole. And there's a lot of religious parallels, especially with that of Christianity, that we'll go over much later in our lecture. That may be the next topic that we actually explore in this micro series, to really help us get going here, to give us a greater understanding of how all of that works. And but yeah, you identified a lot of that through religious myths, and how we have a lot of religious myths were really more or less the individual and the collective, and the different personalities and personas that constitute that psyche. And that particular process is where a lot of my model is oriented towards, as well as biological features, neurological, and we'll look at all that as time goes on, how that may actually work. And so, but very interesting, and there's a lot of truth, and a lot of a lot of the modern day academic world and psychological world has kind of devalued Jung's work for the most part. And now we're focused more on a systematic, mechanistic type medical, Western medicine type approach that definitely has its benefits, but I don't think it paints the whole picture. I think it's absent unless we consider a lot of Jung's work with the development of the self, development of the ego, and development of the self, and integration of the unconscious, continuing with what he called the shadow part of ourselves, the part that we wish we didn't have, so to speak, figuring out how to wrestle with it and to integrate it rather than just suppress it or repress it, because then it manifests itself in reprehensible ways. And so to make yourself whole, you have to integrate those particular parts of yourself. So, and we'll relate that to Christianity and transformation and things of that nature as we go along. But so now we have the Upper Paleolithic, 40,000 to 10,000 BC. Like I said, there's an explosion of art. I thought I had artwork on here. I do not know why I don't. But as we go through this lecture series, I'll add that in. You have cave paintings that are beautifully illustrated. That's just remarkable how all of a sudden that sophistication came into play. And the fascinating thing is too, regarding the caves and these paintings, most of the paintings are found deep within caves, not in a place where humans would have found residence at. And most people did not actually live in caves during that particular point in time. They actually had built huts, circular huts at that time. They've been building them, even dating all the way back to the Neanderthals, 200, 300,000 years ago or more. And so at least there's evidence to suggest that. And, but again, so you have the caves, these images. So most anthropologists and historians believe that they were the very first world's temples were caves. And Jung went on to say how the cave represented the womb of the mother, and that you were going back, and that represented the womb of the mother, represented the unconscious. And so you went in there to discover something new, to integrate, to make yourself whole. And so shamans would go in there, and certain people, and oftentimes, like I said, one of the caves in France in particular, you had to find those paintings. It was, I believe it was 1.5 kilometers deep into the cave itself. And you had to trek through there, bent over for quite some time. It took like 30, 45 minutes to be able to get to the particular location. And, you know, you had little to no lighting as you went through there, by the way. And so these were not just simply at the edge of caves doing cave paintings, and there was significance behind it, religious, symbolic significance. So this is where symbolism, symbolic thought begins to really emerge. It almost seems out of nowhere. But again, we have evidence that shows reveals a somewhat progression towards that type of exhibition of symbolic thought, dating all the way back to 68,000 years in Indonesia, all the way, several thousand miles away from the European caves, where most of these drawings, as well as in the Middle East. But one of the primary figures at the time was the Venus figurines. They're found in abundance, as well as the spirals. Now, the Ouroboros is a later conceptualization that has its roots within the spirals as well as disc, and it's in relation to the female goddess of the Venus figurines that continue to evolve over the course of time. And the emphasis is on fertility and rebirth. And so it's the idea of transformation. And in the hunter-gatherers, it was the death of life going into winter, and then the reemergence. And then that became more sophisticated as we began to control nature and figure out how being able, through the emergence of agriculture, in 10,000 BC with the death and rebirth of crops. And so the ideas of death and rebirth go as far back in, most likely into the Upper Paleolithic. Also, in relation to the lower bars, we have discs that are painted as well. And so this is signifying, so the very first kind of religious figure, you could say, was most likely female. And it was the emphasis on the sacredness of the fertility process. And so you were, and so going into the cave was signifying of going back into the mother to be reborn yet again. And there's symbolic relationships to that of the story of Christ being killed on the cross, going into the tomb and being transformed, being reborn yet again. So it's the idea of rebirth. Now, what Carl Jung and Eric Neumann were pointing out was that it's not necessarily physical, so to speak, as much as it is psychological. It's a rebirth of the psyche, and that the more novel information that you acquire and you contemplate on and seek to fit in and reconfigure your own thinking, that it will transform you and transform your perception of reality and make you into a quote unquote new creation. And so, as I said, we'll be going further into depth with this as we go along. Just more or less an overview. So the Younger Dryas period, 10,900 ending around 9,600 BC, different ice sheet levels. These are different ones. The very last one here kind of shows a little bit of what the Younger Dryas period looks like down on the bottom right-hand corner. And so the ice sheets were rather thick. And at that time, it was said that the ice sheets up into northern Europe were as much as 2 kilometers high. So we're not just, you can imagine prehistoric people at that particular point, hunters and gatherers looking up, seeing ice sheets that were, high as mountains. Very fascinating. That would have been an amazing sight for sure. And so this, it froze yet again, and temperatures plummeted. And so it was cold and dry, and we have people are having to reconfigure themselves. And there's a significance of what they've been finding. There seems to be a significance genetically as well as even evolutionarily with humans and climate change. Climate change seems to transform us, and it's because of selection pressure, evolutionarily speaking, that we have to adapt in order to survive. And so we adapt to these shifts in climate. And most animals oftentimes do not adapt. They stay in one location, like chimpanzees, for instance, our most common ancestor lives within the jungles, and that's where they stay. They stay put within that particular area, within that climate. So there's not as much adaptation. We emerged out of Africa around 2 million years ago as Homo erectus and engaged with the world. And so we experience all sorts of different climates, different type of environments. But in the process of exploring, there were also various different climate changes that are occurring at the same time. So we had to adapt in order to survive. And adaptation, anytime that you have a particular pressure upon something, whether it's even as an individual through school, or it rewires you and shapes you differently. And these are on a dramatic collective scale. And so every time that humanity, our ancestors experienced something like that, there was almost a shift in an advancement, so to speak, progression in culture, tool making, ways that we hunted, or whatever it may be. There was a dramatic shift that occurred at that particular point. And they've even correlated that with recent papers showing dramatic shifts genetically emerging out of each of those types of massive climate changes. And so there's a significance with that. Well, sure enough, directly after the Younger Dryas period, you have the emergence of agriculture, herding, the very first evidence of agricultural, at least the true definition of it, of planting seeds, cultivating, things of that nature. emerges in modern day Iran, in the Zagros Mountains, as well as in the Levant. And of course, we had been at that particular point leading up to that. We had been going through and grabbing grains and seeds. And so we'd already been cultivating, but we didn't really understand the concept of being able to plant and do it, controlling it ourselves. And so from there, that's when we began to really become experts gradually. And it shifted humanity in a dramatic way. We began to settle. We began to develop that, which allowed us to really develop culture in a completely different way. We began to build more permanent settlements that allowed us to establish ourselves and protect ourselves from the environment. So we began to control things a lot more. So that's a key feature there that most people do not take into consideration, is the increased ability for humans to control their environment, at least to a certain degree. And that has evolved and progressed over the course of thousands of years to where we are here today, where we can even control the temperature in our house, and then go from our house to our car, control the temperature there, then go to a building where they have a controlled temperature. And, even that's just one example among many. And so it has done something genetically, neurologically, at a vast scale that we're still trying to comprehend. So Göbekli Tepe, 9600 BC, when the very first emergence of it. And these are, you see the circle formations. Most of the housing at that time were in circles. And so there were little huts, and they believed that, and these are circle. I don't have a large, I should have done a larger picture, but like I said, we'll go into more of this as we go along. But there's circular formations, and they're built on top of each other. They bury them, build them on top, and so on and so forth. And it's a vast complex, and they're even figuring out that it's even more vast than just that particular locale. It expands beyond that for I believe it was 100 miles or so from the last time I investigated that it just keeps expanding. You have Koran Tepe, you have Navala Kore, you have a bunch of different areas that mimic that same style that goes on and stretches. So there was a great significance that emerged. This is not something just small. Emerged after the last ice age, the Younger Dryas period, and all of a sudden you see a significant cognitive leap, you could say, where people I would say that of consciousness, where people became more precise. Now we're erecting things up into the air rather than just simply painting them on in cave walls. We are creating our own temples. This is the very first world temple. We have erected a temple up, and we'll go into the significance of that as we go into the series and its relation to depth psychology and the emergence of the ego out of the unconscious, how it could be a symbolic representation. The interesting thing is, so the top left-hand corner, that's a totem that's actually found in Navala Kore. I wanted to add this because there's been a lot of debate on what exactly the pillars represent, and it has arms, and they believe, obviously have the ancient alien conspiracies, but as far as historically and archaeologically and within anthropology, it's not just male figures. And I've yet to find a research article or book that really discusses this, that I believe they're actually male and female figures. Prior to that, you only have mostly the Venus figurines. Well, out of the Younger Dryas, you have the first emergence of the male component of the, I would say, mythic dynamic. And so you have, the reason being is because the pillars, if you look at these center top row picture, you see little punctures into the top of the pillars. Those would represent more or less the diadems, which were a crown. It's like a crown of Venus figurines are found with these on multiple occasions. And if you look at the totem again, those are the female representations. They even have the same thing. They have the diadems up on top. It's like a net almost at that particular time. And the male version of it, you have the Urfa man which dates to, I think it's 9,000 BC or 88,000, somewhere around there, that was found over in Urfa, which was another megalithic site that mimicked the construction dynamics of Göbekli Tepe. And you also have some other male type figures found as well. You have the phylic man, which has an erect penis. He's holding an erect penis. It's Quran Tepe, found at Quran Tepe, that dates around the same time. You also, but as you can tell on the top right the top right photo there, there's a bucranium, which is the signal of the bull. And as you go into the Neolithic times, you'll find Venus figurines and you'll find the bucranium together. And many historians believe that that is representations of the male figure. Now, an actual differentiated male figure emerges in Romania around 5000 BC. And then from there on, you had the male, and it's actually a male and female figure sitting next to each other, representative of superiority, or most likely a divine presence, is what many believe. And from then on, throughout the Levant, Middle East, and Europe, you begin to see a male component. And then they begin to assume their own roles, especially when you get into ancient Sumeria, ancient Sumer, when we had ancient Egypt, when you have the very first writings emerge, and they begin to talk about these. Gimbutas and Jung, and trying to think, Calvin as well, all kind of discuss these same ideas, that you begin to have a male figure emerge. And then all of a sudden they start assuming various different roles. And you don't just have one of each like you do in the prehistoric. They actually become diversified and numerous. So in the Sumerian texts, you have multiple different male and female gods that are at play. And Jung believed those represented the different personas, different personalities that inhabit the individual and inhabit the individual and the collective. And that the idea was that they were working these things out little by little. And by the time you get to Christ, you have a unified figure that represents all of those various different gods, both male and females, into one entity. And that was supposed to represent the ideal human, that the human could develop themselves and unify themselves in a coherent fashion to where they no longer have various different personas and personalities, so to speak, but they're at least somewhat unified, and maybe in an oscillatory manner, but they're unified nonetheless, and it's not so scattered. We can become more coherent, more precise in our identity and in the ego and self, and so on and so forth. So we'll go into that, but trying to get done here. We're already at 33 minutes. And so around 9000 BC, into what's called the pre-pottery Neolithic B era, that was the beginning of that. No longer do you find circular structures, circular homes. You begin to find rectangular and square, 90-degree angles. And for me, on the conscious side, this represents the idea of increased precision and efficiency. And in relationship to Ian McGilchrist's work on hemispheric differentiation, the left and right hemispheres of the brain, that the left is more into precision, categorization, and the right more into holistic and that of comprehension, context. And so what happened is we began to continue to develop. The left hemisphere began to develop as well, at least in its functionality, maybe not necessarily neuroanatomically, as far as actual neuroanatomical changes, but just the functional components within the connectome of the brain itself being more integrated of the left hemisphere. And so precision emerged more and more, as well as coherence. And the left hemisphere specializes in that, at least in part. Now, you need the left and right to be really working together to create a comprehensive picture of whatever you're doing. But the left, in its specialization of the precision and accuracy and that of categorization, And so that's where you begin to really see that emerge as time goes on, even into the emergent civilization, which we're about to end with. And at that time too, you also see pottery that gradually begins to come into play. You also see more precise tool making in a diverse set of tool making. So greater categorization, increased precision on tips and markings and things of that nature, and consistency in the development of the tools, and so on and so forth. Same thing with writing. Emergent civilization around 4000 BC approximately. You have writing that emerges in both Sumer and Egypt around 3100 BC. And so writing created a whole new system of perception, I would say. It's so revolutionary. It's absolutely insane. It's the very first. Well, I wouldn't say very first, because really the symbolic representation, the exhibition of symbolic thought represented in the cave paintings were really the very first of its kind, and then it evolved over the time into writing. But it's a precision of thought, because the ideographic representation and pictographic representations found in the cave painting are ambiguous in nature compared to the precision of writing itself, to be able to categorize and to truly coherently piece together the thoughts of individuals and the collective alike, and to be able to extract that data. It's the very first external symbolic storage device, you could say. And so, especially in a precise manner. So it's revolutionary. And so you have, okay, this ancient Sumer, you have ziggurat on the bottom left-hand one over corner. That was the pyramids of, so to speak, of the Sumerians. And then you have the very first pyramids of Egypt. They were set pyramids, and that was part of the old kingdom of Egypt that dated from 3000 BC to about 2400 BC until its collapse, which is significant in and of itself and really underrated, to be honest. And then obviously the hieroglyphics on the bottom left-hand corner. And so the cuneiform is the writings of the Sumerians there on the right side, with the picture, as well as the clay tablets. So they would use little sticks and do impressions into the clay tablets while they were soft, and they would do different symbols, and you could piece those together into an actual language that were written down that you can understand. And we'll go into this very fascinating stuff as you go along, and you really connect the pieces over the course of time, how we evolved and how consciousness and coherence and precision, symbolic thought all evolved. And it makes you have a greater appreciation. And that's why a lot of today, whether it's on the right or left political spectrum or ideological spectrum, I would say, because I don't care really at all about the political side of it. I think there's a surface level analysis. The ideological orientation of those two sides is that they're extreme and they're partial. And I believe just with Ian McGilchrist that it's a left hemisphere, emphasized left hemisphere perception of reality. So it has a narrowed focus of taking parts out of the context rather than including the whole context. Same thing with the ideas of patriarchy, all these different things. Like, well, why do we even have that to begin with? It's like, well, through corruption, yet you have the left that says that they don't believe in conspiracies, but then they're believing in a conspiracy. So they contradict themselves. It's a contradictory deal. It's like, it's true, you're right, but you're also wrong. You're leaving out a long, rich history of human evolution, development that must be considered in any analysis of almost any kind, really, in order to have a comprehensive understanding of what the hell is going on here in the first place. And so, especially whenever it involves, large issues on the collective level, especially even on the individual level. And so, hope you enjoyed the introductory overview of the micro lecture series, the evolution of consciousness. And I will go more into this with my model. I'm currently trying to work on a few different things. Like I said, I have grad work. I'm also doing a peer-reviewed paper project right now with my aunt, who's a professor at University State Arkansas University. And I'm also trying to do a preprint on a couple of different things. But you can also see my preprint on SSRN. The link is in the description. That's involving a lot of what I'm talking about here. And it goes based off the ideas of equality and gender equality and what that means exactly in relationship to the evolution of human consciousness. And you can check that out. Links in the bio. You can also check out my blogs. I have multiple different papers. You can read on those prior to these lectures to kind of understand where I'm going on some of these things, give you a little bit more in-depth preview. That way you can kind of be on par with it. Links in the bio. And so if you want to obviously help financially, you can support my work by donations. The link as well. All those links are in the bio. You can check them out. Anything helps. I greatly appreciate it. Hope you have a great week ahead. Enjoy. Please like and subscribe. Take care and God bless.